Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the farm. Into the greenhouse as we go. Welcome back to Wishwell Farms, everybody. My name is Jason. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I'm going to be explaining to you why it's so important to keep the fruit clusters and the suckers pruned on hydroponic tomato plants. As you can see down through here behind me, the plants are getting quite tall. Probably real close to 6 feet tall. Now they are in Beto buckets, they're about a foot off the ground, so they're probably in reality only 5 feet tall. The third flower cluster is out on the plants. So we got cluster number 1, cluster number 2, and cluster 3. Now when we get to cluster number 7, that first cluster will be ripe and ready to pick. So one of the main reasons that we do this is to not only keep from overloading the plant with too many fruit, because if that happens further up the growth of the plant, we're going to start getting some blank fruit clusters. The plant's going to say, I've had enough, let me ripen the fruit that I'm carrying, and it's not going to produce fruit. Now eventually once you pick them, they will come back and start producing more fruit. But as a produce farmer who makes a living on selling the tomatoes, I need these plants to be productive throughout the entire growing season. So if we trim back the tomatoes somewhat on the first 5, 6, 7 clusters, we're less likely to get blank spots in the plant. And if that happens, that means I don't have any tomatoes to sell for a couple weeks, and that can be devastating when you only have a 5 or 6 month window to sell everything that you grow and make a living. So it's very important for me to keep these plants, the fruit clusters on the plants, trimmed back so they're consistently producing all the way until termination in the fall. Now another reason that we do this is to get larger tomatoes. If we let each fruit cluster mature out its fruit of 6, 7, or 8 tomatoes, we're going to get a lot smaller tomatoes. Some of them may not even get much bigger than golf balls, and they probably wouldn't get much bigger than tennis balls. But by trimming these back to 3 or 4 tomatoes, we're going to get those nice big slicer beefsteak tomatoes that you want for your hamburger during the summer. So that is one of the main reasons that we do that as well. We want nice big tomatoes. It also gives us an opportunity to trim off the ugly fruit. Not every tomato is perfect. It might seem that way when you go to the grocery store or many of the farmers markets that you buy your tomatoes at. They all look perfect. Now, there still will be secondhand tomatoes. We call them seconds, or scratch and dent. You know, they might have a little ding or a scratch or a nick on them, or they're just ugly shapes. You know, some people actually search out the ugly tomatoes at farmers markets. Most likely you're not going to ever find those in a grocery store because they've all been trimmed off, thrown out, or sold at a discount somewhere. So trimming these fruit down to 3 or 4 tomatoes allows us to get rid of those ugly tomatoes. Every once in a while one's going to slip by, or it's going to get scratched up in the picking and packing process, and we'll discount those about half off at the farmers markets, and people love them. People gobble them up. If you're just chopping them up to make salsa or tomato sauce, they don't need to be perfect, right? So still a decent market for us to sell our second-hand tomatoes. All right, I want to show you how I do this. It's very simple. This is a perfect example. So this cluster has 4 darn near perfect tomatoes on it right here. So we want to keep the biggest and prettiest tomatoes that are closest to the stalk. We don't want to keep these out here because it's going to get so heavy it's going to pull this down. This tomato truss right here will kink, and then that creates another job for us that I'll be showing in a later video of putting a support J-hook, truss hook right here to hold this cluster up. So we're going to pick the biggest ones, the prettiest ones, and the closest ones to the stalk. And anything extra gets trimmed off, just like that. So I just cut off 4. One of them still in the flower stage, and the other 3 have already been pollinated and starting to form fruit. Now these 4 tomatoes are ready to continue growing and not be fighting for nutrients with these other 4 that I trimmed off. Okay, I found an example here of one I'm going to trim down to 3. You can see my fingers are on the 3 largest and nicest looking tomatoes right here. And the reason I'm not going to keep 4 on this one is because these other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are way behind and are not going to keep up with these three. So there's a likely chance that there's never going to be a harvestable, marketable fruit from any of these. These will be harvested and we'll be moving on up the plant to the next cluster before these would ever be ready. So on this one, I would trim it right here. There's the 5 I just trimmed off, and now it's left with 3 of the nicest tomatoes. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about sucker pruning and why that's so important. These tomatoes are indeterminates, which means they don't have a determined growing point, an ending point to their growth. If you would keep light and heat on these plants, they would grow 40 to 45 feet in a 12-month time span. Now, we terminate ours after 5 or 6 months. We just want them for spring, summer, and part of the fall, and then we terminate them, clean them out, and get ready for the next season. But you can potentially grow these year-round. They're eventually going to become unproductive, and you're going to need to restart the plants, but it is possible to grow a 45-foot greenhouse tomato plant, or indoor tomato plant for that matter. It doesn't have to be greenhouse. It just needs heat, nutrients, and light, and it's going to keep producing. However, in the winter months, when light is low and the days are short, you would have to add supplemental light. And if you're living in a cold climate, like I am here in Ohio during the winter, it's going to take a lot of heat, whether that's propane or natural gas or a wood burning stove or some other kind of heat source. It's going to take a lot of energy to keep these tomatoes in the 60s and 70s Fahrenheit through the entire growing season or during the winter. Anyway, so back to the suckers. We want these indeterminate plants to be one main stem all the way up, one stalk. And coming off that stalk, obviously, are the branches and the fruit clusters. That's all we want. Every week, it's going to set another fruit cluster and 3 branches. So each week, it also is going to be trying to shoot out new little side branches called suckers. They're not really branches, it's like trying to grow a new top, a second top to the plant. So I'll try to find a good example for you here. Okay, if you look at the top of this tomato plant, here is the main top of the plant. And then right here in this kind of the crotch of the plant, I call it, the joint where there's a branch, you see another little tomato plant starting to grow right there. He's a little guy, only about 4 inches, but that's when we want to remove them before they start taking nutrients from the plant. So we just pop it off. It has like a little natural breaking point called an abscission layer. We got to be very careful. When we break those suckers off, we don't want to use scissors, and we don't want to peel it. If you're not careful when you're snapping that sucker off, there'll be like a little skin that peels up the plant. You're exposing that plant to possible pathogens and fungal diseases that could attack the plant, and then you're going to be fighting that the entire growing season, or it could possibly kill your plant. So we're very careful how we snap those off. We just sucker pruned yesterday. I should have brought the camera out and filmed it yesterday because we had a lot of them that were like 6 to 8 inches long. That's a little too big. You want to get them when they're small. Here's one right here, about 3 or 4 inches in size. That way it has not taken away from the plant growing new fruit, new flower clusters. If you leave, oh, here's a big one we missed. I'll show you this here in a second. If we leave this sucker on here too long, it'll start growing its own flower clusters and eventually fruit. Then you are definitely taking away from the production of your other fruit on the plant. So take a look at this. All right, so here's the main stalk of the plant right here. And look at this sucker. See how it looks like another baby new plant growing on there? This one got missed probably 2 weeks ago. It just popped right off, right out of that little joint there. So there, look at that. Almost like an entire new tomato plant. And if you look closely right here, you can see that this sucker already had a cluster of buds forming. There's 4 of them right there. So we definitely waited too long to remove this one from the plant. So we really want to try to remove them when they look like this one right here. It's about 4 inches in size. That's perfect. Just give it a little snap and it pops right off. So like I said, we sucker pruned everything yesterday. This greenhouse has 615 plants in it, and all the suckers have been removed. And you can see all the flower clusters as I walk down through here. They are just absolutely loaded. The plants look beautiful right now, and most of them are on their third cluster. So we're right on schedule to start harvest at the end of April, maybe even the third week of April. There are still quite a few tasks involved in keeping these plants manageable and at tip-top shape and producing all spring and summer and fall. I don't want to get into too many of them in this video. So in the next video, we'll talk about a few more of the tasks that are involved in managing greenhouse tomatoes. But before we wrap this video up, I'm going to take you around to the other greenhouses and show you a real quick farm update and what everything's looking like right now. All right, this is our grape tomato greenhouse that we transplanted in the last video, probably 10 days ago. I'm a little behind on filming because I was on vacation in Hilton Head. Anyway, the tomatoes are looking really good in here. We've gotten 2 stringings on them currently. If you look closely right here, you can see the first stringing and the second stringing. This is called the Florida weave system, and I'll be showing you how that works in the next video. But they're flowered out really nice in here. Not really any grape tomatoes to speak of yet. Just some very, very small ones about the size of peas that I've seen. But there's very few. So it's probably going to be a good 2 months before we're harvesting in here. So on these grape tomatoes, today we are removing the bottom 4 branches and all the suckers that are sprouting off of the stalk. So we want this tomato plant, this grape tomato plant, to have a nice clean 1 foot to 1.5 foot stalk. So all of the fruit clusters are formed up here in the area where it's trellised by the strings, so they aren't flopping all down on the ground. We don't want to have grape tomatoes being harvested and stepped on the ground. So you can see, if you look real closely, there's like 4 suckers and 4 branches we're removing off each plant. Just came from down there. That's our grape greenhouse. We call this one our small house because it's only 21 feet wide instead of 30. And this is our tall house. That was where we were earlier, talking about pruning the fruit and the suckers. It's called the tall house because it's 18 feet tall with a ridge vent to let heat and humidity out during the heat of the summer. And this one right here we're getting ready to walk into next is the long house because it's longer than all the other ones at 148 feet instead of the standard 96. We just transplanted this one less than a week ago. So this greenhouse holds 1,000 plants, and if you're wondering why this side is not planted, it's because we stage these 1,000 plants into 2 plantings. So these 3 rows are just starting to root into the beto buckets, and I saw a few flower clusters just getting ready to open. So this will be where we start picking after, a few weeks after we start picking in the tall greenhouse where our first planting was. Next, I'm going to take you into our seeding house, or our transplant house, where we grow all of our plants, and show you the stage of growth that those plants are in for these 2 rows here, and they're going to be planted here in about a week or 10 days. And here we are in our transplant house. There's some leftovers from transplanting last week, and right here is the second planting of the long house. You can see that they're still a little on the small side, probably 8 to 10 inches tall. And we're going to start putting some bamboo stakes in today before these plants start falling over. And next week, like I said, they will be going into the beto buckets. And for our final planting in the small greenhouse, you can see these little guys just got put into the 4-inch rock wool cubes a few days ago. And they're probably 3 weeks off until they get transplanted in the beto buckets. And then after that, we are ready for our outdoor field tomatoes. Today is March 28th, and by April 5th, we will have planted our field tomatoes, and then we will be pretty much completely done with all of tomato seeding on our farm. Now we do plant 2 plantings in the field. The main one is going to be that April 5th seeding. that will take place next week, and then we'll do one more very, very small seeding at the end of April or early May, just so we have some really late tomatoes right before frost, when these have kind of all petered out and fizzled out and getting ripped out for the season. And we make relish on our farm, and that'll be another topic for another video. Our homemade sweet pepper relish. One of the ingredients is green tomatoes, so we got to make sure we have green tomatoes in the fall to go along with our red peppers. Alrighty, that's where we're going to wrap this one up today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We'll see you again real soon in the next farming video.